Hey everyone, welcome back. We're starting a new series this week called Anthem, where we're going to be talking about worship and all the different ways that we can worship. Now, you might notice we have a bit different of a setup this week, but we're just going to roll with it. That's kind of the nature of things during COVID. This is also my last series that I'm going to be recording for you guys, so I'm feeling pretty emotional about it, I gotta say. So we want to talk about worship and all the different ways that we can worship. And sometimes when we think about worship, a lot of times what we immediately think of is like the worship team at the church, the ones up on the stage playing instruments and singing, and music is a big part of worship. But worship is actually supposed to be something much larger than that. In fact, in Romans, it talks about our entire lives being acts of worship. So what does that mean? Well, worship is when we are deliberately connecting with God in ways that recognize who God is and help us realize that God matters and is connected to our lives. So that can look like a lot of different things. Some people talk about nature as being a really important part of helping them worship. Have you ever been out somewhere and it's just really beautiful day that day? Or maybe you're going someplace that has like a waterfall or, in a forest or camping or something like that. And your heart just kind of opens up and you're like, wow, this is amazing. We believe that that comes from God, that nature itself actually helps us connect to God. I know for myself, I go to camp every summer, and it's up in the around Ottawa, a little west of Ottawa. And it's up on this beautiful lake. And there's something, every time I just roll into the campgrounds there and look at the lake, something in my heart just opens up. And I feel connected to God in a way I don't any other time. It's a pretty special place to me. And I've heard that from many people, that they worship God best, not when they're in a church building, when they're out in nature. And the book of Psalms actually talks about this. Now, Psalms are poems. They were worship poems and songs that were sung by the ancient Hebrew people, and they've been collected and handed down throughout the years. They've been sung in many different ways. We don't even know what the original music was to them. A lot of our worship songs that we sing today borrow from it. But Psalm number 19 says this: "How clearly the sky reveals God's glory. How plainly it shows what he has done. Each day announces it to the following day. Each night repeats it to the next. No speech or words are used, no sound is heard, yet their message goes out from all the world and is heard to the ends of the earth. God made a home in the sky for the sun. It comes out in the morning like a happy bridegroom, like an athlete eager to run a race. It starts at one end of the sky and goes across to the other, and nothing can hide from its heat." So even in nature, it says the very way that the world was created shows how amazing God is. And this is true when we look at very big things naturally. I think when we understand how vast the universe is, that this world that we're on is so small and is surrounded by space, and we see the sun and it seems huge, but it's just one of billions upon billions of stars out there. And we look at the night sky and understand how vast space is, and God made all of that. But it's also in small things. When you look down and you see down to the smallest detail, all of us, we just walk around as bodies, but those bodies are made up of cells. And those cells are made up of atoms, and they're finding out more and more things, that the further down they go, it goes smaller and smaller. Each of those atoms is electrons and positrons, and now there's things called muons that they're discovering. And I'm reading about physics, and they're like, there's this whole other thing that we didn't know about that's underneath everything. And every time they go down something smaller, it's even more detail, and everything is designed in a way that holds together. And it shows how amazing God's artistry is in this world. Now, the thing is, with all of this amazing creation around us, all of it testifying to how amazing God is, sometimes we can just ignore all of that. My family loves to tell a story about one time we went on a family trip between when I was in grade 8 and grade 9, and we drove down to California to see my grandparents. It took us 10 days to drive down there and 10 days to drive back. And my parents, they're like obsessed with history. So we stopped at every museum and national park and like historical monument along the way. And I was like, why do we have to stop at all of these places? I just want to get to grandma's house. And I was actually reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time that year, I think, or maybe it was the second time. But I was really into my book, and I got my very first Walkman, and I was listening to my cassette tapes, and I got so caught up in those things that I didn't want to stop. So we went to the Grand Canyon, like one of the most famous, amazingly beautiful spots in all of nature. And I remember the first time we got there, we got out and I was like, wow, this is so huge. It's beautiful. But we just like kept driving and seeing more of it and more of it. And finally I was like, it's a bunch of rocks. I've seen it already. And we stopped at the scenic overread and I stayed in the car to read. And my parents were like, Brian, you've got to come see this. And I'm like, Mom, it's rocks. Okay, I've seen enough rocks. I'm not getting out of the car. And my parents were so angry at me because it's this like wonder of the world that they had traveled out in the middle of the desert. And I just wanted to read my book and be in Middle Earth at the time. And just like I wasn't appreciating the nature that was around me at that point. Sometimes we can just take creation for granted, especially during COVID when so many of us are trapped inside and we spend all of our time online and it's really hard to get out in nature. We can forget that this amazing world that God has created and how wonderful it is. So one of my challenges for you is, even though I know we're in a lockdown and things are hard, figure out time to get out. Go on a hike. Spend time walking around the neighborhood. If the weather is nice, go out. Hey, even if it's a rainy day, it's a rainy day today. Like, get an umbrella and go for a walk outside anywhere. There is something about being in nature that connects us to God. Now, you don't have to love camping. I'm not a huge camper. I know my wife really likes camping, but I'm like, if I don't have a real mattress underneath me, I don't sleep. This is not okay. So I'm like, let's stay in a hotel and go see nice things. Glamping is like the most that I'll do. But even so, it's really important that all of us have time to connect with nature because nature is part of how God speaks to us. It's part of how God reveals how big and amazing and complex and loving that God is. So spending time in nature is actually a part of worship. So here's things to discuss in your group. Are you a person that loves being in the outdoors, or are you someone who doesn't like the outdoors? Have you ever been someplace that was so beautiful that it just awoke in you this sense of awe and awareness of God? And what are some ways, even in our COVID world, that you can connect with the natural world around you? Discuss it in your groups, and I'll see you back here next week.